Powell is cutting rates because the government needs lower rates in order to finance the debt. And not just the government. I mean, because rates were so low for so long, we have an entire economy and financial system that is built on the foundation of extremely low rates. And if that foundation goes, then everything that we've built on top of it collapses.
So joining us now on Speak Up with Anthony Scaramucci, the legendary Peter Schiff. He is the founder and CEO of Euro Pacific Asset Management. He's a best-selling author. I've read several of his books, by the way, all of which are incredibly well written, and a lot of things that Peter has said in these books over the last several decades has actually come true. We are at intellectual odds in the Bitcoin situation. I will point out that about a year and a half ago, I debated Peter. I think it was on intelligence. It was a London-based debate, gold versus Bitcoin. I lost that debate. And so I just want to point that out to people. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I know Peter enjoys the fact that I lost that debate.
Well,
Although,
it's just based on the audience. So, as far as the Bitcoiners are concerned, I've lost every Bitcoin debate. So that would
well,
include the
listen,
one I did with
I'm
you.
more like I'm in the Bill Parcells camp. We let our records speak for ourselves. So I was obviously a dunce in 2022. I seem to be more of a genius right now, but who knows what's in store? Maybe you know better than me. But I want to start with a couple of things about you. I think you have understood the debt cycle, frankly, about as well as anybody. And this is a deep dive show, Peter. So I'd like you to tell the audience out there about the debt cycle, what's going on with the United States, how we went from $7 trillion of debt just 16 years ago to $34 trillion of debt. And with 6% of our GDP going to the debt now, we're deficit spending is 6% of our GDP. Where could that go? And when will people start to care? Because you're of the theory, just to paraphrase briefly for our audience, that at some point, nobody cares, and then all of a sudden they have to care because you're in the middle of an Armageddon-like crisis. But please tell us your thoughts on this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've cared about it for a long time because I know how it's going to end up, and so I'm concerned about the ultimate consequence of what we're doing. But the politicians, they're just concerned about postponing those consequences for as long as they can. They don't really care ultimately what happens to the country. They're more concerned about what happens to themselves, in the moment, their political careers. But I have a bigger concern with these with these problems. But the reason that we have so much debt, and it's now closer to 35 trillion and 34 trillion, is because we've been able to get away with borrowing it. And we've been able to do that in large part because we've had a complicit Fed that has monetized this debt and has kept interest rates artificially low, including the rates we have right now. I think the rates are still too low. And now Powell is going to be cutting them, not because inflation is back to 2%. It's nowhere near there. And in fact, it's headed much higher. But Powell is cutting rates because the government needs lower rates in order to finance the debt. And not just the government. I mean, because rates were so low for so long, we have an entire economy and financial system that is built on the foundation of extremely low rates. And if that foundation goes, then everything that we've built on top of it collapses, which ultimately needs to happen. We have to let this phony economy collapse so that we can replace it with something viable and that can last longer. But it's not going to happen. And the other reason we've been able to get away with this, and probably even more so than the Fed, is the dollar's role internationally as the primary reserve currency and the willingness of foreign central banks to hoard dollars and foreign entities, companies to transact in dollars, even when they're not buying products that were made in the United States. And so we've created a large external demand for dollars, which has enabled us to run $1 trillion a year trade deficits. No normal country could get away with that, but we've been able to do it. And so we've been able to export a lot of our inflation. I mean, as bad as it is, it'd be so much worse if we didn't have these trade deficits. But I think that we're getting close to the point where the world is not going to go along with this anymore. And I think you can see that in what's happening with gold purchases by these central banks, particularly the central banks of the countries that enjoy the largest trade surpluses with the United States. They're the biggest buyers of gold. And I think they are preparing for a post US dollar world where America isn't able to run these trade deficits, and therefore we're not able to function in our current form. And we're not going to be able to have the low interest rates that we've enjoyed. We're not going to have the low consumer prices, even though the prices have gone up a lot in the last few years. They're still a lot lower than they otherwise would be absent the dollar's status in the world. I mean, dollar loses that status and it's going to collapse against these other currencies. And that means prices are going to go up dramatically.
Okay, so listen, we're in the same camp on this. I am very worried about it. I don't understand how we can sustain it. I'm going to be the contrarian here for a moment. I'm going to ask you to respond to the following things. Over the course of human history, we've had people say something bad's coming and then it doesn't come. I'll give two quick examples. One is Thomas Malthus. He basically said we were going to run out of food. The population was growing faster than we could produce food. The technology made him wrong, Peter. And so we had all this induction of fertilization and irrigation. We have more people dying from obesity related disease than we do from starvation. A second thing, and you and I are contemporaries, we had peak oil theory. That was the mid 80s. People said by the year 2010, we'd be running out of oil. Again, technology bailed us out. And so the first question I have is, can technology bail us out? Can things like AI and productivity unleash a tremendous more or greater than expected growth so that we can outpace the deficit spending? And then the second question is related to China. I think you and I, as I listened to your interviews, I'm worried about China. They feel like they're also in a debt crisis. They feel like they could trigger some deflation at global deflation at a moment when the U.S. is monetizing debt and creating inflation. So the first question, technology, what's your response to that? And then what do you think of the situation in China? Are there any black swans that could come out of that?
Well, first of all, I mean, technological advancement has been helping us all along. I mean, imagine where we would be today if we had all this debt, but we had the technology of the 1960s or 1970s. If we hadn't come up with all these advancements, it would have been even more difficult. And so everything would have probably collapsed even sooner. So yeah, you have the ingenuity of individuals in a relatively capitalist economy innovating and producing and helping us to absorb all the damage that's being done by governments. And yes, I mean, AI, robotics, the combination of those two potentially could really increase human productivity. And yeah, that will help. Now, clearly, if we didn't have all the debt, we'd be much better off, right? Because we'd have all that technology and we wouldn't have this debt problem. So if you're saying, will the technology prevent a crisis? But even if it does, it still robs us of a lot of the benefits that we might have had that instead simply diffused a bomb that was going to go off. But, I don't think that all of these benefits from AI are necessarily going to fully mature and deliver their potential in time to spare us these consequences. I think if you look at where the debt is, it's already spiraling out of control right now, where we're almost adding about $1 trillion a year, I mean a quarter, to the national debt. The government came out with their February spending numbers last week, and spending is 50% higher than it was in February of 2020, which is the last pre-COVID February. And so government has grown by 50% in a 4-year time period. I mean, that is enormous. And the trajectory is increasing. And, the Fed is already doing exactly what I said it was going to do. I mean, it's ignoring uh, evidence that inflation is still a big problem and is going to get worse, and has called off the rate hikes, and is now signaling an end to quantitative tightening, which is really a precursor to a resumption of quantitative easing. And so the inflation problem is about to get substantially worse, even though it's already been bad. And so this, I think, is going to accelerate a currency and sovereign debt crisis that I think will come too soon for the benefits of AI to somehow render all this debt payable. And
So,
you have to remember too, it's the AI is not just America. I mean, the whole world is going to benefit from this. It's not some uniquely American phenomenon.
so I'm going to put my Keynesian hat on. I'm John Maynard Keynes. Why wouldn't the government just print or create a $37 trillion coin and just pay off all the debt and just tell everybody, hey, all your debt is now paid off and our balance is down to zero from a deficit point of view?
Well, I mean, that's basically default. There's no difference. Um, and if they did
But,
that,
but aren't we gradually defaulting? Isn't
no,
this
not
like
no,
a
well,
isn't this like a
we're
slow
slowly
motion demolition right now of default?
right. But if we did what you just suggest, um, then it would almost amount to a default right away, like, because we would destroy the value of the dollar if we were to print, if create such a coin and claim that it had that much value. So we would all of a sudden put you know trillions and trillions of dollars into circulation with no ability to ever withdraw them. I mean, the Fed would not be able to suck up that liquidity. It would be a permanent increase in base money supply that would crash the dollar. And so, I mean, yeah, that is the problem. And and we don't even have to print and do the coin, right? We just print up enough money, as long as the Fed goes along with it, right? The Fed has to participate. But yeah, I mean, we could do what Weimar Republic Germany did, what Zimbabwe or Venezuela. Sure, we could do that, but I mean,
Yeah,
that's
well,
not a
I'm not,
positive
I'm not
outcome.
suggesting that. I'm just
But
trying to
that's
tease.
but that's
I'm
what
trying to
that's
tease
what
out
that
of you.
$34 trillion coin is, right?
Yeah,
It's that so
yeah.
we
Well,
can't.
I'm just
I mean,
trying to tease out of you so
if
people can understand the calamity of doing something like that.
yeah, look, we have to choose. Do we want to destroy the currency, or do we want to default on the debt? Because we can't pay the debt without destroying the currency. So we've got to pick the poison. Now, unfortunately, politicians tend to pick the poison that is the least damaging to themselves. And so I think they will always choose inflation and devaluation over deflation and default, even though deflation and default is a healthier and better solution to the problems that we have. That's not the choice that our leaders are going to make.
Okay, but I'm going to put you in charge. You're Czar Schiff. You've been installed into the Oval Office, and the Congress has decided that, in your infinite wisdom, they're going to pass legislation pursuant to what you want, and so you don't have to deal with the morass and tribalism of politics. List off some of the things that you would do to try to save the country from this debt crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you work with Trump for, was it 8 days? Seven? How many days were you
Come
in
on,
the?
Peter. I mean, don't chip me out of that much of my
No, no,
career. That's it's
I'm not.
like
I'm not.
taking
I'm
20,
just.
it's
I'm
like
bringing
taking
that up.
27% of my career away from me. It was 11 days, brother. Don't
11 days. All right.
yeah,
No, I mean,
don't
but
hurt my feelings.
I mean, no, I'm not hurting your feelings. I mean that you work with him. Maybe you still have his ear. So I'll tell you a few
No,
things.
no, I don't
Because
have his ear. I haven't talked to him in almost 5 years. Easter Sunday it'll be 5 years, but
oh,
he racked up $7.8 trillion worth of debt in
oh
four
yeah,
years, and
I
he was
was
signing wild omnibus spending bills,
yes,
one after the other, and the Democrats were almost laughing. He gave them every single thing that they wanted.
yeah, I was very critical of Trump while he was president for doing that, for his spending. And increasing government. The last thing we needed was a space force. We could, we can't even afford the military we have. Um, but to the extent that he wants to do something good with the second term, that he very well may have, um, because I do think the economy, which is lousy, is going to be even worse on election day. And so, the worse the economy is, the more likely Trump will be
You
to
think
win.
Trump will win?
Excuse me?
Do you think Trump will win?
Yeah, I do think he will. I thought he was going to win the first time. I thought he was going to lose the second time. So I've been pretty good at it, and I think he's going to win this time. I did vote for him the first time. I wasn't able to vote for him the second time, nor am I able to vote for him this time because I live in Puerto Rico. But what Trump needs to do, if he really wants to make a difference, if he wants America to be great again for real, not just a fantasy where you pretend everything was great, but if he actually wants to do it, right? One of the first things he needs to do is level with the American public about the position that we're in, because there's going to be a lot of short-term pain, right? A lot of austerity, and people have to know why they're going to go through it, like why we're doing this, and they have to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? So he's got to like have a heart to heart with the public. He probably can't do that before he's elected because they won't vote for him. But once he's in office, right, it's hard to get rid of him,
But he
so he can
said
he
that
can
he's not
then
going to
be
touch
more
any of
honest.
these entitlements. Him and Joe
But
Biden have said the entitlements are off the table. Senior citizens out there, we're going to keep pumping the Social Security and Medicare. He's not.
no,
You're
you
saying that
got
you
to
think
tell
he
the
could bait
public.
and switch the public?
No, there's no money for these entitlements. They're broke. Their Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, and he has to admit at level with the public. The government never should have started Social Security, and for the reasons that apart from it being unconstitutional, it is a Ponzi scheme, and the current generation is left holding the bag. But if we don't make serious cuts, I would rather to say, look, we're just going to phase out Social Security. There is no more Social Security. There's no more Medicare. There's no more Obamacare. Um, but we can come up with a transitional program to pay older people some type of annuity stream to help them get by, to the extent that they're destitute because the government squandered all their Social Security money on spending, and it's gone. But I think we have to means test it, and not just based on income, but based on assets. So if you've got a lot of assets, you can't just leave them to your kids. You need to sell them and spend the money. You can't ask other people to pay for your retirement just so you can leave assets to your kids, right? Because a lot of people who are paying these Social Security taxes don't have any assets. I mean, Social Security today is a transfer in many cases from the poor and the middle class to the rich. And the poor and the middle class can't afford to pay the bill, nor could they afford to pay the much higher bills that are coming if politicians intend to keep these commitments to my generation, the baby boom. The generations that come after are going to get clobbered with massive increases in the payroll tax. And I don't want that to happen. So we got to have that discussion. We got to get rid of these things. The money's gone. No one's entitled to anything. It's a giant welfare system. That's what it is right now. So we have to have a means-tested way of taking care of people who, unfortunately, but for Social Security, would have nothing. But the only reason people are in this position is because the government taxed them so heavily while they were working. If there was never a Social Security, then people would be in better shape. But I want to get rid of a lot of taxes. I want to get rid of the income tax and the payroll tax. But to do that, we need to get rid of most of the federal government. And that is the bigger conversation that we need to have. Most of the things the federal government does should not be done at all or should be done by the states or local governments. So the federal government has to start getting rid of agencies and departments, slashing the payroll, and repealing all sorts of regulations that have been inhibiting, our freedoms and our prosperity. Ironically, the Justice Department today is filing antitrust charges against Apple, and I would repeal these antitrust laws. I use Apple products. I've got no problem with those products. If I don't like them, there's other products I could use. But they're going after Apple because they're claiming that Apple's monopoly power is causing consumers to pay higher prices. I mean, come on. It's the government that's causing everybody to pay higher prices for everything by creating all this inflation and by imposing all sorts of regulations that dramatically reduce the efficiency of businesses, and all the added costs are passed on to the consumer. So we need to dramatically shrink government to restore freedom and prosperity. 100 years ago, the US government didn't even spend 5% of our GDP. There was no income tax, there was no payroll tax. We were free people. And, we had an industrial revolution. We became a very rich nation. We built the middle class without all this government. It's the government that's been destroying the middle class. That's why husbands and wives both have to work. In fact, now they both have to work multiple jobs just to get by, and they barely get by because they got a mountain of debt. Whereas before we had all this government, one guy without a high school diploma could support his wife and 4 kids without having to borrow any money and still save for retirement. So we need to have a more prosperous society, and we can build one, but we have to tear all this government down, and we have to allow bad debts to default, which is going to happen. We have to let interest rates go up because they're much too low, and when interest rates go up, so that we can encourage savings, which we need to have a real economy, we have to allow businesses to fail. We have to allow debt to go into default. We have to allow asset prices to come down. And some people are going to lose money. That's just the way it's going to go. But if we don't do this, everybody's going to lose a lot more. Inflation is going to do so much more damage than what would happen if we did the right thing. Right? I mean, there's no way to escape the pain. But if we deal with it on our own terms, there'll be actually a lot less pain. Yes, it may happen sooner, but we'll get over it, and then we'll have a much more vibrant recovery. I mean, we may never recover if we stay on the course we're on now.
Let me test something on you, because I read your work, and pursuant to what you're currently saying, the system right now, though, is working for the very wealthy. And just hear me out for a second. The very wealthy have assets, and so their assets go up pursuant to the fiat currency. If you own oceanfront property, you bought it for $4 million in 1980, it's worth $80 million now. And so, the worker and the middle class person who's using their time and labor sort of getting stolen from them. So if I'm working on a crane, I get paid $1,000, and 1 year later I only have $920 worth of purchasing power, and then a year after that it goes down to $850. But the rich person in the society, they're buying stocks, they're able to buy assets, and they're able to protect themselves from levels of the monetization. Now, the bad news for them, unfortunately, is we know from a society, when you have this level of discontent, you usually get some type of upheaval. I don't want to live in a barbed-wired McMansion while my fellow neighbors are suffering.
Yeah, look,
So comment about that for a second, if you don't mind.
yeah, I agree that this tax system that we have now is not the tax system that our founding fathers envisioned. It's not even the tax system that Congress or Woodrow Wilson envisioned when they passed the income tax following the 16th Amendment. The income
Mhm,
tax was supposed to only apply to the
mhm,
Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the
mhm.
Carnegies. It
Yeah.
was never meant to apply to the wages and salaries of the middle class. So, I'd like to get rid of the income tax entirely for everybody, but at a minimum, wages and salaries should not be taxed. I mean, we can't tax people's labor. That's their most sacred and important asset. And it isn't even really a gain because you can't even deduct the value of your labor from the wages that you earn. I mean, if I do a day's labor and somebody pays me $1,000, I gave up a day's worth of my time. What's that worth? The government says your labor's worth nothing.
Right.
If you're a businessman, you get to deduct all your costs and you only pay an income tax on your gain. But if you're a worker, you can't deduct any of your cost. Your labor has zero value, and that is a big problem. So we need to get
Mhm.
rid of the whole concept that your labor has no value. I own my labor, and if I exchange my labor for wages, I have no income. I've gained nothing, and it shouldn't be taxable. Taxes should be imposed on consumption. So when I go and spend the money I earned to buy stuff, that's where the taxes are supposed to be. And that's what the founding fathers intended. The only reason they even gave the federal government taxing power was in case there was a war. They were worried about, well, what if we get invaded and we need to fund an army? It wasn't supposed to be for a peacetime
Right.
economy. We need to restore that.
Well, I mean, the problem was the problem is if you have an income tax and then you put in a VAT, which is effectively a consumption tax, they're never getting rid of the income tax. This
Oh
is
yeah,
why
I don't want both.
you
I want
can't
to
have both.
replace it. I want to
Right.
replace
Yeah,
it.
no, I listen. That's why I listen. I mean, we intellectually disagree on Bitcoin, but a lot of things you've said have really
And
provoked me and have really pushed
and
me. You weirdly, you're probably not going to like me saying this, but weirdly, you push me into Bitcoin in some ways because everything that you're saying, I believe you disagree, but I believe that Bitcoin represents, because of its digital properties, it represents a hard asset.
yeah, I mean, there's a
You
lot of
disagree with
people.
that. I hear that, but the truth of the matter is because of the networking effect, it's not whether you remember what Keynes said, right? It's not me guessing who's beautiful. I have to guess what the other judges view as beautiful. Remember, he said that about the stock market. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of people that are in Bitcoin for those reasons, right? They see the same problems that I see. In fact, I may be the reason that they see those problems, right? They
I
learned
just
it
gave
from
you
me.
credit.
And
You wrote a book about 10 years ago. I think it was called Crash Economics or something. What was
well,
it?
there was Crash Proof, the real crash.
Yeah, the
I
crash
tend to
proof.
have crash in the title.
Yeah, no,
Not economy crashes.
yeah, the crash
Uh,
makes everybody crazy. So of course I think I bought two of those books, maybe in Crash Proof 2.0 or something like that. But
Yeah, well, the one that has all the solutions
Mhm,
is the real crash, how to save yourself and your country. So I put all the solutions to the
mhm.
problems, which of course, haven't been adopted. And a lot of the problems that I brought up in that book have gotten much worse in the years since I wrote it. But there are solutions. And capitalism is a very dynamic economic system that
Mhm.
has the capability of delivering tremendous gains to the population. And the more tools we have, AI and robotics and all this stuff is going to make it easier to to rebuild what the government really destroyed. But we have to recognize where we are and make the changes and accept the short-term losses instead of trying to bail everybody out and prevent everybody from losing money like we did during COVID, where we just told people to stay at home and then we just gave them money to go shopping. I
Mhm.
mean, that was about the worst combination of economic policies, and Donald Trump signed on to it. He started it. Then of course Biden took the baton and ran even faster. But the precedent was established while Trump was still in office. So we have to recognize that. Get these Republicans that want to blame everything on the Democrats without accepting any responsibility uh, for what they've done.
That's
And
bipartisan.
it's not just what. Now, yes, I agree the Democrats are worse, but that doesn't excuse what the Republicans have done.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so everybody has to accept there was some share of the responsibility and
Yes.
and take the political heat. for doing the right thing, including the Fed. But you got a coward at running the Fed who refuses to call out the mistakes that Congress and the president make. Says, "Oh, I'm
Mhm.
not allowed to criticize anything that the government does." Who said? That's what he's supposed to do. That's
Right,
what Paul
exactly.
Volcker did, criticize
Mhm.
deficit spending.
All
I
right.
mean, you
So
gotta
you would.
call it. He says, "Well, we take whatever fiscal policy we get. We don't really care."
Mhm.
I mean, how could you say that?
Right.
You're
Right.
the head of the central bank.
Well,
You're
I mean,
supposed to
it was a
discipline
tough
the
thing to
government.
say because you're trying to tame inflation, but the fiscal spending is out of control, and so the aggregate demand is getting pumped up, which is creating the inflation. So
Yes, you can't.
even if you're tapping the brakes, it's not going to really matter. But I owe it to our viewers and listeners to hear them out. So we're going to play a few of their. We're going to show a few of their questions. So, what's your take on the Justice Department's monopoly case against Apple? You gave us a little bit of it, and so you're against the case. I'm going to test the theory on you, though. I want you to get your reaction. This is Bethany from Florida. Um, we broke up AT&T and T, and it unleashed a tremendous amount of innovation. Are you worried that there's 6 or 7 monolithic tech giants, and if we don't break them up or we don't force some type of antitrust measure, that we won't get the innovation or the cost savings that we've gotten in the past when this happens? What say you?
Well, first of all, I mean, the antitrust laws started with Sherman, and then Clayton. All this was part of a populist era where people, there
Hmm.
was a backlash against the so-called robber barons. It started with Standard Oil,
Hmm.
Alcoa Aluminum, but I disagreed with all that. I don't think Standard Oil was a problem. I don't think Alcoa was a problem. I think the government has done a lot more harm than good by breaking up companies that it believed to be monopolies. I mean, they're usually wrong. I mean, they at one point they wanted to break up General Motors because they thought it was a monopoly. I mean, they're barely
IBM, Peter,
surviving. There's
remember?
so much.
Remember the
But
IBM antitrust case went for
I,
25 years.
I mean, I remember Hollywood Video wanted to merge with
Blockbuster.
yeah, was it Blockbuster? And they stopped it because they said you're going to have a monopoly on video rentals. When a few years later, nobody rented videos at all. Yet, I mean, I mean, these guys, they don't know. They're just trying to justify their existence. Uh, I just think that in a free market, let businesses operate. If Apple is overcharging its customers, it will lose its customers. Nobody forces me to use Apple products. And I've tried other products. I've tried, different phones, and I always end up coming back to the iPhone. And if somebody comes up with something better, well, I'll use it. But, I got no problem with Apple. Apple doesn't have a gun to my head forcing me to buy their products. The
But
government's got the gun.
but
The
let me
government's the one
let
that
me
forces me to do stuff. I
let me
got a
push you a
problem with
second
that.
though. If there's only 2 phones that are out there right now, and they have a little bit of a duopoly, and I have an app, and I want to put it on the Apple app, and I want to put it on the Samsung app, and I'm getting charged 30% VIG from Apple. Is that fair to the smaller businesses? Now, Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, actually beat Apple in court related to this.
Yeah, again, it's about what's fair. If I own Apple, right, it's a private business, and I get to decide the services that I want to offer, the way I want to offer them, and how much I want to charge. But the ultimate arbitrator is the customer who can accept or reject what I'm offering.
Yeah, but
And
but again, I'm not
the
going
government is
to.
going to screw up more often than it
I
gets it right.
appreciate that. I just making the intellectual point. Once these things scale and they become monolithic, they can suppress smaller businesses. And I'm giving you the example of the app, and they can do that. But I hear you on this case.
I think
And
the free market will find a way around it. If you look at where you have the most monopoly power, where you have people getting ripped off, it's where government has intervened and created a monopoly
Mhm,
through government
yeah,
regulation,
mhm,
where
that's
the
true.
government comes in and outlaws competition and protects
Hmm.
a particular business that is
Hmm.
giving them a bunch of money. Like, look at the Jones Act and look at how a
Hmm.
small group of US shipping companies is preventing the American public a lot. Certainly hurts people here in Puerto Rico, probably more
Yep.
than anybody else in the country. But people are hurt because the government is protecting a monopoly on US shipping routes from very inefficient, overpriced US shipping cartel is protected from all kinds of foreign competition. And if the government just simply allowed competition, then shipping costs would collapse and
Yep.
goods would be a lot cheaper uh,
Hmm.
throughout the country. But the government won't let that happen. So it's pure hypocrisy for the government to waste time and money going after Apple when the low hanging fruit is to just eliminate all the laws that it's already passed that are stifling competition and driving up prices.
Okay, let's go to the next question. Got a couple more questions. We talk about the Fed monetizing the debt, yet the Fed is not allowed to directly buy treasuries. How do they monetize the debt?
Well, if you think about the word monetize, you're turning debt into money. And so, how does a central bank do that? Well, it goes into the market and it buys government debt. And it has to go into the market because the Fed is not allowed to buy the debt directly from the Treasury. So it goes into the secondary market and it operates through these big banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. They act as the broker. So they actually earn a commission on all these debt sales, right? That's pretty good money if you could get it, right?
Yeah.
But the Fed goes into the market and buys these bonds. And now, where does it get the money to buy the bonds? Well, it creates it out of thin air, right? It just, credits it to a bank account. And so it takes this debt and turns it into money because now there's money in the economy that wasn't there. And now the Fed takes that bond and sticks it on its balance sheet. So now it's books balance because the currency, the money that it created, is counted as a liability, but the bond that it bought is counted as an asset. And so at some point, right, if the government needs to withdraw that money from circulation because it needs to fight inflation, it would then take that bond, sell it, and withdraw the liquidity, withdraw the money, and then destroy it. And so then the money would go away, and the bond would return to circulation instead. But and they're doing that somewhat now with quantitative tightening, right? The Federal Reserve is
Yep.
trying to shrink its balance sheet and withdraw some money from circulation, but it's going to stop doing that, and it's going to reverse the process, I think, this year, which is unfortunate. It shouldn't do that, but it will.
So it's a great answer, way better than I could have come up with myself. That's Craig from Ohio. Let's go to the next one. Huge court ruling against the 6% real estate agent fees, among other things in that industry. How do you see this impacting the housing market? This is from Jesse from Boston.
Yeah, well, I think that um, the way we're operating the MOL listings and the way um, certain, I guess, homes, or if you're selling your home yourself, you can't get on there, and you have to go through one of these agents. That's obviously kept um, prices, the commissions high, but I think people have been finding ways around that for quite some time, and I think the commissions have been coming down. I mean, it was 6% at one time, and I see a lot of the deals now going at 4%, 3%. So they've already been going down. So I think that trend was already there. And I think obviously this will probably accelerate the trend towards lower commissions as more people are able to access that service. And I think, more um, homeowners, to the extent that they want to sell, will be able to sell without a broker. I mean, for sale by owner is a lot easier, in the age of the internet, where you can, you don't have to pay. I mean, it's a big number to pay somebody a 6% of a home. I mean, and it's not just, when you buy a home or you sell a house, you may not own it for all cash. You may have a big mortgage on that house. And that 6% is not 6% of your equity. It's 6% of the whole value of the home. So it's possible that if you don't have a lot of equity in your house, the realtors could make more money off the sale than you could.
Yeah,
I
listen,
mean, it's a lot of
I
money.
think it on the
Hey,
margin certainly will hopefully help liquidity in the housing market. Let's go to the next question. How might the potential fire sale of Trump's properties, such as 40 Wall Street, impact commercial real estate values in the New York financial district and broader market trends? This is Bobby from Brooklyn.
yeah, well, obviously, to the extent that Donald Trump were forced to liquidate some properties, I guess to fund the bond. Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't get a great price. I mean, obviously, I mean, if you knew the seller is Trump, and pretty much everybody knows the buildings that Trump owns, he usually puts a big T on it or something, but you know which ones he has. If you know Trump is selling, I mean, he's in a bind, and so you're not going to offer a lot. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how many properties he has. I mean, the commercial market is already in bad shape. I mean, look at all the WeWork property that's probably up there for sale, and everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's not a good time to be forced to sell commercial real estate in New York City or any major city, for that matter. But I don't know on the margin how much worse it would make it. But I mean, what they're doing to Donald Trump is, is horrible. It's illegal. And hopefully it does backfire because, I said I would like to see him win. And part of the reason is because of what the government and the media have been doing to him. And
Well,
it's not that,
I mean, listen, I read through the complaints on that case. I think that case is a bogus case. I've said that openly. I don't like Mr. Trump. I don't think he has the right temperament to be the president. That's my opinion. Other people can have other opinions, but I'm
oh, yeah,
just
he's
saying,
not my first choice, Anthony, but
yeah.
he's better than Biden.
Well, I mean, we'll respectfully disagree. I
Oh,
promise that this
you
would be.
prefer Biden?
I would take a forgetful elderly man over an absolute crazy person if I'm choosing between Weekend at Bernie's and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'll go with the half dead person over somebody that needs a lobotomy. I mean, we were there, and you have to remember, we have 45 senior officials that are sending out a warning alarm to the American people about how crazy the person is and how
And it's
unstable the
not just
person is.
though, Anthony,
But
it's not
whatever.
just about Biden. Who's pulling the strings behind the Biden puppet? I mean, who's really running the show and calling the
Just
shots? So
to me, I'm going with the institutions of the democracy over a maniac. But that's me. And the good news is, I believe there'll be more people that will do that than others. But listen, you're a smart guy. Maybe you'll be right. Who the hell knows? Let's go to the next question. I think we have two more, and then I'm going to leave you alone. A small business owner. I'm on pins and needles. Is there a recession ahead? Will there be a soft landing? Is 24 going to be better than 23? What's your take on that, Peter? This is from Alex from Arizona.
yeah, no, I don't think there will be a soft landing at all. And of course, there's going to be a recession. There's always a recession. The question is, uh, how soon does it start? My money is that it's already started. I mean, I think we are in a recession. I think that is the main reason that Biden's popularity is so low. In fact, he scores lowest on the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if the economy were so good, the voters would be giving him credit for that instead of blaming him for how lousy everything is, because they can't afford food, they can't afford rent, and they're working three jobs,
But
and they'd
it's
rather have
him
one.
and Trump though. Trump caused a lot of the problems that Biden's facing. By the way, Biden's not doing us any favors either. I'm just saying it's the combination of what I
Oh,
call the demo publicans.
yeah,
It's an
but
oligarchic duopoly that's causing the problem. It's not just
that's
you
true,
can't
Anthony.
you can't
I'm
yeah,
not excusing Trump. I'm just trying
right.
to put myself into the position of the voter. He's just going to blame whoever's in charge at the time, right? And so that happens to be Biden. But I'm saying that the reason that Americans feel so bad about Biden is because the economy is horrible. And I think that that's really the case. I mean, if you look at the jobs numbers, Forget about the establishment survey. Look at these household surveys that show huge job losses month after month after month. Look at the fact that all of the net new jobs that have been created under Biden, other than the restoration of the COVID jobs that were temporarily on hold, but all the really new jobs on net are all part time. We haven't
Yeah.
really created any full time jobs. We've
Yeah.
destroyed full time jobs and replaced them with 2 or 3 lower paying part time jobs. Um, and the debt numbers are off the charts. Consumers are drowning in debt. In addition to all the debt that they're obligated to pay that's been accumulated in their name by the government. And, I think that after the election, they're going to come back and they're going to revise a lot of this economic data. And they're going to come say, hey, we've been in a recession since, Q1 of 2024 or Q3 of 2023. I mean, I think we've been there. Just, if you remember the Great Recession of 2007, 8, 9, I mean, that recession started in December of '07, but they didn't call the recession until December of '08. And what they did in December of '08 is they came out and said, all the economic data that we've released over the last year has been wrong. Here's the new data. And instead of this growing economy that we were reporting, we were actually in a recession the entire time. And
Well,
all
I
these
agree. I
jobs
mean,
that
the
we
people can feel it. I mean, look, you're describing, I may have made money in my stock market and Bitcoin account, but those are people that have money. The average person on the street feels like the price of gasoline, eggs, milk, maybe gas is down recently, but I'm just talking about the totality of the pie chart of their consumption. They feel very tight and they're
yeah,
upset about it.
remember, the reason that investors are so happy is the reason that everybody else is so miserable. It's the same thing. It's inflation. So
Right.
inflation is causing stock prices to go up, but it's
Yeah.
also causing food prices to go up.
Hmm.
So if you don't own stocks, but you have to do grocery shopping every week, you're a big loser from inflation.
Well
But if
said.
you've just got a bunch of assets, then you're a winner, right? It's because there are winners and losers in inflation. It's a
Mhm.
transfer of wealth and purchasing power. So the people who are losing are the ones who are the most upset.
Well
And
said.
that's the lower class and the middle class. They just don't know who to blame. I mean, now they're blaming Biden. And the government likes to blame inflation on Putin or on greedy corporations. They never accept responsibility. I just said we have a 50% increase in government spending. Where's that money coming from? It's it's causing the inflation.
Yeah.
All that spending is bidding up prices, and the money that was printed, that the government spent. Right? There is no free lunch. We're paying for all this government every time we go to the grocery store, every
Yeah.
time you go to the gas station, every
Yeah.
time you buy anything, you're paying for these Biden deficits. And
But
yes, we're also paying for the Trump deficits, right? And the Obama deficits and the Bush deficits, right? This has been going on regardless of who's in power. And the only
look,
time the Republicans seem to care about the deficit is when they can't do anything about it. The
right.
minute the minute they're in charge, they do nothing.
Well, they
But when
spend
they're
like
out of
Uncle
power,
Phil.
yeah,
But
they complain about it.
your point was we were okay with it for several decades because the economy was growing faster than it. But now it's almost impossible to grow the economy faster because you've got interest charges that are feeding into it, plus entitlement programs that are feeding into it. And so the inflation that you just described is creating a vicious circle because
Oh,
the
and think about
entitlements
this,
are going up.
Anthony. So the big buyers of U.S. debt, were foreign central banks,
Hmm.
the Fed, and government trust funds. Social Security, Medicare, we're buying treasuries. All three are now selling.
Right.
Foreign central banks are net sellers. The Fed is a seller, and Social Security trust fund are sellers. They've already the Social Security is right now collecting less in taxes than it pays in benefits.
All
So
right.
everybody that used to buy treasuries is now selling. I
Let's
mean,
go
so
to
what does
another
that say?
question
There's
because
no way to finance this unless the Federal Reserve, comes back to the table, which is what they're doing. And
yeah,
they just laid the foundation for that by saying they're going to slow down quantitative tightening.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, the next thing is to reinstitute quantitative easing. And so inflation is going to go up. And you look at these charts of commodity prices, to me, they look explosive. I think you're going to see across the board big bull market in agriculture, industrial metals, in energy. All these prices are about to, party, and roar like the 1970s. And there's no way that's consistent with 2% inflation.
All right, we're going to make this the last question. You've been very generous with your time. Of course, I could talk to you for several hours. Uh, and this is one of your mantras. And again, I love bringing on guests that have different views than me. So let's hear your view. Is Bitcoin the new gold? This is from Phil from LA. Now, Phil, I'm going to let Peter talk. I think it is. Peter doesn't. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, obviously that's what Bitcoin proponents are selling. And in fact, Bitcoin is deliberately designed to, appear like gold. It's represented as a gold colored coin when Bitcoin itself has no color and it's not a coin. It's just a string of numbers. And so, there's nothing about Bitcoin that would resemble a coin, although the name coin is in there. And the way they come into existence is their mind. But there's nobody with a pick and a shovel. You solve a math problem. So that doesn't sound like a mining operation to me. It's a mathematics equation. It's computation. But they use these words and these images to try to create the false impression that when you're buying Bitcoin, you're buying a digital version of gold. But you're not. And because gold can't be digital. Some things can be digital. Music can be digital. I can listen to my music digitally. I don't need to have a record. I can read a digital book. I don't have to have a physical book in my hand. I can read it. But I can't eat digital food. Right? If I don't want to starve to death, I need real food. So digital food isn't going to work. It's the same thing with gold. Gold can't be digital. Gold's a metal, right, that is used in all sorts of industries and for all sorts of things. And gold is the most useful metal that we have. And the only reason we're not using it even more is because it's very scarce and very expensive. So oftentimes we substitute metals of a lower quality because we can't afford to use gold. But gold is a very rare, very valuable actual metal. And if you just make a digital representation of it, it's not the same thing. Right? It's like a digital house. I can't live in it. It's not going to keep me dry when it rains. So some things have to be in the real world. They can't just exist in a digital world. Now, what you can do with gold, if you want, is you can transfer ownership of gold digitally. You can have a storage facility that has gold instead, like a bank would have, or a blacksmith, and you can create a digital. You can tokenize it.
Gold Bullion International. GBI.
Yeah, you can create a token that is backed by that gold, and you can transfer the ownership of that physical gold digitally, electronically. But with Bitcoin, when I send my Bitcoin to somebody, the Bitcoin doesn't represent ownership of anything other than the Bitcoin, which has no intrinsic value, doesn't do anything. But yes, there's a limited supply of Bitcoin. There's an unlimited supply of cryptocurrencies, but there's a limited supply of Bitcoin. And so if people want to buy Bitcoin and other people don't want to sell it, well, then the price will go up. But if people want to sell it and they don't want to buy it, well, then the price will go down. The question is, why do people want to buy it? I think they want to buy it because they think it's going to go up and other people will pay more. But I think when that changes and people no longer expect the price of Bitcoin to go up, everyone's going to want to get out, and then the market's going to crash because there's no underlying fundamental buyer for Bitcoin other than the speculator. And if the speculators want to sell, and so again, if you're buying Bitcoin because you think it's an alternative to gold, I mean, it's not a store of value because it doesn't have value. It's not a safe haven. It's a highly speculative token. It's the ultimate risk asset because there's nothing there, right? You're just buying hype. You're buying sizzle when there's no stake. So, if you want to trade and you want to gamble on momentum and other people's willingness to to keep buying stuff, you could trade it you have to know what you're doing and recognize that you're playing with a hot potato that could collapse, and at any time. So recognize what it is. But if you really want to a store of value and an alternative to the fiat system, then you want to buy actual gold. You could buy actual silver, or you could buy real assets. You could buy stocks. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I buy foreign stocks. I buy emerging markets. I think there's a lot more value there. And I've thought that for a while. I mean, the US market has been overpriced for a long time, in my opinion, and it's gotten more overpriced. But I've been buying value internationally. I've been focusing a lot, and I do with my clients, on resources, on stocks that own resources and will benefit from this bull market that I think we're going to see in commodities and natural resources. But I also think there's going to be a major devaluation of the dollar due to a loss of reserve status, and I think that a lot of foreign currencies are going to gain against the dollar. And so I want to own businesses that earn those currencies, so that when I get my dividends, I get more dollars that I can spend here. So that's where I think your people's money should be, in quality, dividend paying value stocks, and in commodities, in precious metals, and mining stocks. I don't think Bitcoin is a substitute. You got Michael Saylor saying, "Oh, it's the greatest property in the world." I think real estate is better. I think stocks are better. Gold is better. That's the property that I want to own, not just some digital string of numbers. And
All right. Well,
that
listen, I mean, we're in different camps on this, but I invited you on. You're my guest. My control room has one quick question, so I'll let them run it. What percentage of GDP do I spend on my hair products? And do I pay for that in crypto? You see that? I mean, these guys are mean, man. They're mean. But let me tell you something. The hair,
well, you got nice hair. They're
I
just
think the
jealous
hair
of your
looks
hair.
great, okay? And it's well dyed, it's well colored, okay? And these are like two bald schlumps in the control room, okay, that are giving me grief. But and listen, I don't disclose the percentage of the GDP, but it's close to the budget deficit. I'll just leave it at that. But Peter, you're phenomenal. I appreciate you coming on. I enjoy our spirited discourse, even our intellectual debates. I appreciate where you're coming from on a lot of things. I just think it's an irony. I see the same things you see. I like gold, but I also like Bitcoin. You like gold and you don't like Bitcoin. And maybe one day over a drink, I'll convince you to buy your first Bitcoin.
Well, look,
Who the hell knows?
you
But
made a lot of money in Bitcoin so far, so I guess that's what you like
I,
about it.
you know, I, I
But
I have made money on Bitcoin. I'm not gonna dispute that, no
but
question. But
we'll see. But you may not keep it. I mean, hopefully you
well,
sell some.
I'm a prudent guy, so I have some money in Bitcoin, I have some money in gold and other assets, and so we'll have to see who's right. Maybe, like I said, maybe someday you'll buy one. Who the hell knows? But you've
When
been
you
very.
come into Puerto Rico?
I got to get down there. I haven't been there in a while, but
Oh, you
you've
got
been
all your
very.
crypto buddies down here, so
I know. I gotta go down there. They understand the taxation system better than me. I'm a tax paying New Yorker. But Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Speak Up. It's a phenomenal conversation. I hope I get a chance to see you soon.
all right, take care.